My name is Stan Strasner. I am a member of the Reform and Revolution Caucus. I am a member of Seattle Education Association here in Seattle. And today I'm interviewing some comrades from YDSA. So let's see, there's quite a bit of you. So how about who wants to start with their introduction?
I think I can go first. My name is Jacob Alexander. I am the president of the YDSA chapter at FIU, that's Florida International University. And I am currently joining Reform and Revolution Caucus.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wallace. I'm from Portland State University, and I'm a member of the Reform and Revolution National Steering Committee, as well as the Portland DSA Steering Committee.
I can go ahead. I'm Spencer. I am a member of Reform and Revolution Caucus. I am also the co-chair and co-founder, one of the co-chairs and co-founders of Reed College YDSA in Portland, and a member of the Portland DSA Steering Committee as well.
And hi, everybody. My name is Alex Franzblau. I go by he, they pronouns. I'm a member of the YDSA at Florida International University in Miami, and I'm also a member of Reform and Revolution Caucus.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. And yeah, so let's go ahead and dive into it. So whoever wants to can get in on this. And if you like raise your hand or something, if you want to add on to this. But first one, just to start with, could someone just like super briefly, like summarize maybe in 2 sentences, how did this year's YDSA convention go? What did you take from it? What should YDSA and DSA comrades take from this convention?
So this year's YDSA conference was, I believe, the first in-person conference held at any DSA level since COVID began. So technically, it was a huge success. And it was great to see everyone in person. Politically, there was support, I would say, for 4 areas of action. There was support for increased cooperation with the International Committee, support for a large labor resolution, support for the dirty break, and support for an abortion day of action. There were other things, but I would say those were maybe the biggest policies that were passed.
Can anyone give us a bit of a background? What is YDSA? How strong are you? What has been the focus of YDSA's work more in generally thus far? Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah, so YDSA is Young DSA, and it is the student campus-oriented branch of DSA. So there are chapters that are organized on high schools and college campuses around the country. And really, part of the big thing of the organization is that things are directed at the chapter level for the most part. So different chapters are organizing around different things. There's been a lot of activity around reproductive rights, around campus labor, around industrializing and entering strategic sectors, and it really depends on the chapter. But yeah, I think that's a good framing of it. But I can answer more if necessary.
So we are autonomous from DSA in the sense that we make our own decisions. We are politically independent, so we are not bound by the majority of the specific internal decisions DSA makes. And we have our own budget, which we can spend, but we are connected to DSA in the sense that we are all members of DSA. Our authority is somewhat limited, and we have to appeal to the NPC for certain things like dynamics of staffing or some of the funding we need.
What were the big political issues and trends at the 2022 YDSA convention? Who was there? What's the focus of those comrades coming together? What were the big issues? What were the big trends at the YDSA convention?
So actually building off of the question that was just asked, I think one of the big concerns during this convention was what autonomy means for YDSA. That being what we're actually able to do, the types of decisions we're able to make, and building off of that, the types of political horizons that as an organization we can fight for. I think the resolutions that engaged the most debate and the most energy were R14 on a campaign for reproductive rights and trans liberation, R15 on a strategy for the dirty break, both of which came from Reform and Revolution, and R10 which and especially the amendment, which were questions about how YDSA should be a part of the international committee. With each of these, I think as an organization, everyone there was excited. I think there was a serious willingness to take ourselves seriously and engage in explicitly political debate about what we actually believe and what we should be willing to fight for as students and as socialists. I thought it was extremely exciting to be part of the convention floor and see the energy go around as everyone realized that what we were discussing were serious political issues that as students there are that engage real concerns about how we are a part of DSA, especially with R10. I think the fact that both R14 and R15 were able to pass unamended were a serious sign that we were able to, that R&R's political intervention was strong exactly because we were able to go in there and engage the politics directly and really ask the convention to take a stand on taking YDSA seriously and trying to challenge our political horizons and challenge ourselves as socialists to really do something meaningful.
Does anybody want to say a little bit more about R10 and the amendment on that?
R10 was about integrating YDSA into the International Committee, basically, creating an IC youth subcommittee that would basically be in very tight and close cooperation with DSA's main international committee. And it was just sort of about maintaining some closeness with that part of the organization. And there was an amendment put forward to R10, that was R10-1, by a member of Bread and Roses and supported as a high priority by the Bread and Roses delegates and fellow travelers in attendance. And R10-1 was basically an amendment, in short, an amendment against campism, effectively asking this IC youth subcommittee it was strongly recommending that they take political positions, essentially rejecting campus tendencies, rejecting the idea that the world is primarily divided between geopolitical camps as opposed to, between the working class and the ruling class, and encouraging cooperation primarily with independent trade unions and youth movements, social movements, and effectively forces other than the kind of dominant left parties and forces in many countries and in self-proclaimed socialist states. I could elaborate more on the debate about it, but that's the brief summary. I'm not sure if you wanted me to, how much further you want me to go in.
Yeah, no, say a little bit more about the debate if you can.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, debate around R10 was probably one of the most, probably the most hotly debated or the most hotly contested of any of the resolutions that came up. Whereas for things like the dirty break or things like the abortion rights campaign, in general, many of the concerns were an argument between a particular political vision versus kind of bureaucratic arguments of, what's your organizational capacity and sometimes less focus on the political matters themselves. Those will explain more. That wasn't always the case. There was some still substantive disagreements. On R10, it was very explicitly political and very explicitly about our approach to internationalism. And there were different, very hotly contested perspectives on both sides. On the one hand, the speakers for the amendment to R10, that is, of course, the one that was against campism, were primarily from Bread and Roses. And they were making arguments effectively just saying, making the case for what they called class struggle internationalism, saying that, our approach to international issues ought to be to, make alliances and work primarily with the, oh, pardon me, my grandma just walked in. Sorry. with the independent trade unions, with student movements, with like, for example, they mentioned Chilean Starbucks workers a lot, Ecuadorian feminists, other groups of that ilk, particularly in Latin America. And their focus was then to say that our solidarity shouldn't be with dictators or with, allegedly authoritarian governments in the region, like, for example, Venezuela and China. By contrast, the other side of the argument that was arguing against the amendments were primarily those strongly in favor of the IC's current policy, and who I would say I had what I would characterize as a mostly campus position, but one that I think they argued pretty strongly, basically saying, things along the lines of, who are we to judge as socialists that have not taken power, what it will actually take to maintain power once you, actually achieve a revolution or actually achieve electoral victory. They argue, that the canards of anti-authoritarianism or anti-dictatorship are used against all left-wing governments, including ones that we might ostensibly support, like those of Brazil or Bolivia. And there was also a more bureaucratic / organizational element of their argument, one I found a bit less convincing, which was effectively saying that, the sort of people within YDSA that are already conducting international work have already spoken about this agreement or spoken about the proposed integration with the International Committee, and effectively arguing that the IC wouldn't accept R10-1 or accept this position and allow this to take place, saying that this was, in many people's words, imposing a sectarian viewpoint on a multi-tendency committee, and saying, if you want to change the IC, don't vote for this resolution, just join the IC and try to struggle internally and democratically. Now, I'll give a brief summary, I think, of just my arguments, because I was the one person from R&R that spoke on this issue, or that spoke on the amendment. And I tried to carve out something of a different path from the other two branches of the argument. My first point was to acknowledge that I think this is and ought to be a primarily political debate, and that I wasn't very convinced by sort of laundering our politics through bureaucratic or organizational arguments. Basically saying, if it's true that the IC is multi-tendency, then, we as full members of DSA ought to be able to express an opinion, not impose an opinion, but express an opinion that might differ with the majority. And if our convention had voted for it, that would have conveyed that there was support for that opinion. And I think that if the IC was threatening or saying that they would reject that, then I think that challenges the view of them as non-sectarian and multi-tendency. That was my first point. The second was a political argument, saying that, as socialists, people who recognize that global capitalism is an international problem, and that capitalism and capitalists know no borders, that we ought to be showing our full solidarity with the international working class and seeking proletarian unity. But where I tried to break was, I said, while I share the concerns of the comrades who have already spoken about our uncritical relationships towards, for example, China or Venezuela, I also wanted to challenge opportunism in all forms, including in the IC and the IC proposed IC Youth Subcommittee's relationship to social democratic forces. Basically, where I was arguing that currently the IC's approach, whether it be with Sinn Féin in Ireland, or with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, or with the PSUV in Venezuela, is effectively to just uncritically back the dominant left force within a country, and that I think that that idea that we as U.S. leftists ought to be just humble and learning from these groups without criticism actually inhibits our ability to learn from their successes and failures, and inhibits our ability to deal with, or be able to create actual respectful relationships with, yes, in some cases left and mass left parties and dominant left parties, but also left opposition, unions, movements, etc. The specific quote I used was to say that, in the same way that we condemned Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua, where my family is from, for his banning of abortion rights and for his suppression and massacring of protesters, including socialists, is the same way that we should condemn, for example, Keir Starmer of the UK Labour Party for his aggressive neoliberal policies, his purging of the left from the party, and for his acceptance of transphobes, TERFs, and Islamophobes fully into the ranks and upper echelons of labor. And that was the gist of the argument, to say, number one, this is political and we should have it as such, or the argument is political and we should have it as such, and two, that we must oppose opportunism in all forms. And I think the goal there was to try and carve out R&R's specific approach to internationalism and our emphasis on internationalism. And as a point of criticism, I would say that Bread and Roses, while I think they made a very good and necessary intervention in bringing forth this amendment, I don't think did a convincing enough job articulating an alternative view for what international solidarity ought to look like, or really rebutting the arguments or allegations from the other side that they were just chauvinists or had a double standard between European versus Latin American / African / Middle Eastern parties. In the end, the vote ended up going down to, I believe, 20 vote differential, around 50, lower 50s versus lower 70s. I can't recall the exact votes. So it had a heavily divided room and a very respectable showing for both sides, but the amendment was defeated, and the R10 ended up passing, in its unamended form, basically calling for more integration with the International Committee, with no caveats or changes made based on in relation to their campus tendencies. Long description, but I hope it was thorough.
No, I think that was good. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think we should move on to resolution 14 and then 15. So does anybody want to say a little bit about resolution 14?
So resolution 14 put forward a campaign for YDSA to take up nationally and to coordinate with local chapters around reproductive health care, abortion rights, bodily autonomy, and trans rights. And it included a bunch of different actionable steps to actually make that campaign happen, and the bodies that would be taking up those steps, as well as like a political framing for, here are the demands that we're putting forward, here are the goals of what we're doing, and a description of a united front orientation to coalition work, and how we want to be relating to other forces that are fighting around these issues, like possibly Planned Parenthood or other organizations like that. And this was really a proposal that was inspired off of the work that we've been doing as Portland DSA and as YDSA chapters in Portland, from our Trans Day Visibility Rally, which there's a great article you can read on our website about that, and the reproductive rights rallies that we've done both after the draft and after the actual decision. And we wanted to bring this campaign to YDSA because we feel like it's a really crucial issue for the largest socialist organization in the United States to be involved in, especially at the student level, because these are things that young people care about. These are issues that are incredibly salient to young people and affect young people disproportionately. And we want to be a pole of attraction for our politics amongst young people. We don't want young people to be falling into the traps of more reformist or liberal forces, and we want them to be drawn to a socialist perspective on how to win these things. So that's a lot of that stuff. But basically, that was the proposal. I was the lead sponsor on this proposal, so I gave a lead off, and then we went into debate over the one amendment to this proposal, which was put forward, and basically, literally, it removed the entire resolved section of the proposal. So the framing and the actionable items and the campaign and all of the infrastructure set up to do all of that. And it replaced it with, in short, if there is sufficient enough interest, the national organization will measure interest, and if there's a sufficient amount, there will be a campaign cohort on this issue, which are meetings that happen every other week that a certain amount of chapters can attend to like discuss the campaigns they're doing. And in the next year, there will be one national event held on these issues. And so it deleted the entire resolve section and replaced it with 3 lines that said what I just said. And so that obviously was not something that we were friendly to. And there was a pretty hotly contested debate around it, which I thought was like really a good moment of political development and discussion for the organization as a whole. This was happening on Saturday at about, I don't know, 11 or 12 a.m. or 12 p.m. And at a certain point, we had to pause for lunch. And we were a little bit worried that the momentum of the discussion was going to be blunted by the lunch break. But after it happened, we pretty quickly figured out that like the entire delegation, the whole national convention at the 20-something lunch tables were like hotly in debate, continuing on from the debate we just had over lunch about the resolution. Everyone was talking about it, and the room was just really buzzing with discussion over it, which we thought was great. And we, made our rounds and talked to different people about it. But basically, what happened after that was a few comrades from the University of Missouri, who we had talked to before, came up to us who were really, really excited to do this campaign because, in their state, there's been significant issues around these things, and they wanted to do the campaign, but they were expressing some concerns that others, like smaller chapters, had expressed to them, and they thought that if we could strike a compromise on it, then we could potentially undercut the amendment and get it passed. And so basically what we did was we motioned to amend the original resolution from the floor to just include a line that said, like, we're not forcing people to do this campaign, like there's no punishment if you don't do the campaign, and like you can opt out and you email national and you can opt out of the campaign. And this really undercut a lot of the arguments in favor of the amendment, because there were delegates from chapters that were trying to construe our proposal as forcing chapters to do something. Someone said that their chapter would dissolve if this resolution passed. And like, it was generally like the discussion we felt was being taken away from the politics and dragged down by this, cop-out type of thing. And we didn't want to do that. We wanted it to be about the content, right? So we decided as a caucus that it would be okay to make this concession that these comrades from Missouri had brought to us. We drew up some stuff like on a piece of paper, and we made that proposal. The person who proposed the amendment was initially saying that they wouldn't withdraw their amendment, even though we made this proposal, but we just decided to do it anyways. We made the proposal, the rules were suspended by a 2/3 vote overwhelmingly, and our amendment to the original resolution was approved overwhelmingly, and then the amendment that removed the resolved clauses and all of that was withdrawn. Even though the person said they weren't going to withdraw it, they withdrew it anyways. And then the resolution passed pretty much unanimously. So I would say overall, like it was a pretty successful debate. It was, I think, quite possibly the longest debate on any resolution of the entire convention. And it was a very thorough debate where like comrades with all different perspectives from all across the country were heard on this issue. And I think it really advanced the political level of the organization. And in addition to the debate itself, like the campaign and the actual action that's going to come out of this, I think is really exciting and presents a key opportunity for us to have a significant role and present our politics and present our orientation around these issues. I had talked to, both of the co-chairs, the incoming co-chairs of National YDSA, but one person in particular who's going to kind of be bottom lining this work for us. And they explicitly said, thank you to R&R for putting forward, they were referring to both R14 and R15, but they said putting forward the two most like hotly debated and politically interesting resolutions of the convention. So I think that type of recognition speaks to the powerful nature of this intervention. And it was a really proud moment for myself, and I'm sure it was for everyone else. So yeah, that's R14. Thank you.
So if I could try to elaborate a little bit there on the political concerns, I would say for both R14 and R15, which we'll talk about in a moment, I would say the the primary opposition broke down into sort of three categories of concerns. The first was based around capacity, right? And it was people who argued that the organization didn't have the capacity or capability to institute the proposals that were being put forward. They argued, for example, that a national day of action would fail in the same way many people consider the student debt campaign, which was conducted during a previous period of YDSA. They consider it to have failed. They think that most chapters didn't participate, that it wasn't particularly effective, and so on. So these people who were worried about capacity said that we were effectively proposing things that couldn't be done, and that it didn't make sense to debate them on those terms because we weren't even sure whether the interest existed. And then there was the second type of criticism, which I would say was more politically pointed, which was of differing interpretations of what the transitional method means. And these critics interpreted our actions as being a kind of deliberate attempt to propose impossible demands with the goal of provoking a political crisis that would benefit either ourselves or YDSA, depending on how cynically they read our actions. And the specific argument there was basically that they didn't consider our demands to be legitimate ones. They thought that there was a kind of alternative motive, and that we were either angling to try to gain power within YDSA, or that we were cynically proposing a list of demands for YDSA to make, and that the public would recognize that we didn't believe those demands could be met. And then the third criticism was just explicitly political ones. People who either disagree with the idea of a national campaign, or in the case of Resolution 15, disagree with the idea of a dirty break, just argued on those political terms. I would say that for the question of capacity, I'm certainly sympathetic to those concerns. And I think with our resolution, as it was amended, we did our best to make clear that we had always intended to be receptive to the concerns about capacity. As for the question of the transitional method, I just say simply that when we advocate these demands, we earnestly intend for them to be implemented, and we earnestly desire for them to be achieved. And when we, for example, make demands of the Democratic Party, we do so knowing full well that they likely won't do it, and we intend to articulate that to the public when we say it. But the reason we put them forward is because they are possible, and I honestly believe that with sufficient mass pressure, they could be achieved. And so we aren't just proposing them to try to raise a ruckus and gain attention. We're trying to advocate as best we can a course that could achieve political victory for the demands that people already have. And on the final political point, obviously our disagreements are clear. We propose the resolutions because we believe in the ideas. But I actually, I have quite a lot of respect for the people who just came out and said, I disagree with you. I politically think you are wrong. Because I think YDSA has a bad habit of hiding behind organizational or bureaucratic or argument about capacity. Obviously, all of those things are important to consider, but I think there is an unfortunate trend where we talk about capacity, or we talk about what national can do, when what we're really talking about are priorities. When we're really talking about how to divert resources, how to gain capacity, what matters politically. And so I respect it when someone just comes out and says, I oppose you, not because I think it's impossible, but because I just don't think it's what we should be doing. I think those are the fruitful debates that can allow organizations to develop.
Absolutely. Thanks, Spencer. Thanks, Wallace. Yeah. So yeah, on Spencer's point about yes, you should go to reformandrevolution.org and read all about these resolutions to dive in a little bit more. If you're unsure, and also subscribe to our magazine. Plug that in real quick. And yeah, Wallace, thanks for your points about a little bit about the debate. I wonder if somebody could just give a brief, what was Resolution 15?
So Resolution 15 essentially put forward that it's important for YDSA to begin considering what it means to have a dirty break, and advocated for the creation of a pamphlet and a resource that can educate YDSA students about what it means to do that, and how to engage with that. And from this resolution, I think we saw pretty immediately that we saw a debate that was both tying itself to, again, our responsibility as YDSA chapters and the autonomy that we should have as YDSA as an organization, but also I think a lot of students were eager to begin taking on the bigger question of the dirty break itself. And I think to Wallace's point, about the debates, about the willingness to explicitly just disagree with the political vision, there were really great debates from students who explicitly did not support the idea of a dirty break, but nonetheless stood up and were willing to take that stance. And overall, I think the convention floor benefited from having this wider discussion about the dirty break, being able to hash out these political contradictions and these disagreements in a way that was principled, in order to really, again, try to work through what it is to be a part of YDSA and to be a part of this strategy specifically. It was extremely exciting. The fact that R15 was able to pass, that YDSA will be taking admittedly small but important steps in trying to develop, an understanding of the dirty break, and eventually what we'll be working towards specifically with the electoralism. It's important for us to be able to have those debates, and I think everyone took strong stances that helped kind of raise the consciousness of, again, what was possible for us. I specifically liked a lot of the arguments that were supporting the dirty break and saying that it was, again, our responsibility as socialists to make sure that we elect socialists, that we can't tie ourselves to the Democratic Party and expect it to change, because the Democratic Party is not an empty vessel, but rather an explicitly capitalist party that will not change and will not acquiesce to socialist demands on its own. That we have to create a workers' party in order to be able to effectively demand for the revolutionary reforms that are necessary for workers to actually gain explicit power in the country and to be able to engage a democratic program. To kind of recap, I think despite the fact that the R15, it again takes small steps towards creating the resources necessary for people to understand what it is to be a part of the dirty break, I think overall it engaged a larger discussion that really went outside the bounds and actually looked to the bounds of what it's doing and looked to our political horizons explicitly, and everyone was excited to do that. Again, Reform and Revolution, I think, was unique in the types of ruptures that it was trying to point out in convention by, again, engaging the explicitly political question and not being afraid to have those debates, with the strength that they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks, Jacob Alexander. Yeah, and I just want to say that I'm really, I don't know, it's a great thing. It's good. Like DSA, like I feel like DSA was kind of moving away from the idea of the dirty break and away from the idea towards moving towards working class independence. So it's a really huge thing that a majority of YDSAers, they want to go on like this, continue on this dirty break strategy. It's really great. I saw somebody unmute. Did anybody want to add on to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add in and say, these specific things being called for in the resolution were, one for the NOC to develop, or the National Organizing Committee within YDSA, to develop a pamphlet on the dirty break, similar to the rank and file strategy pamphlet that was released by DSA National, on that aspect of labor strategy. It would be doing the same for the dirty break, and also offering quarterly meetings to educate any YDSAers who are interested in the history of the dirty break or the strategy of it, and some background on previous attempts to form mass independent or socialist parties in U.S. history. And also, one very key detail was that the resolution would also recommend that the co-chairs of YDSA, who are also members of the NPC, the National Political Committee of DSA, would actually have to, would recommend that they bring up this resolution for discussion to the NPC, essentially, asking them to just discuss this, consider why YDSA decided to vote for it, and if there are any ways that National DSA could help us in realizing what we voted for at our convention. And so it is, once again, this is not a resolution that subverts the authority of DSA or tries to claim, supremacy or separatism of YDSA, but rather we're expressing an explicit political opinion and, actually moving towards trying to, put those ideas forward and intervene in a real way in the national politics, which Stan, you have correctly identified as having moved in many ways away from the dirty break and towards a more conciliatory approach towards the Democratic Party. And I'll mention in terms of the debate over this issue, Jacob Alexander, you were right in saying that this time around, we did actually get a much more substantive and explicitly political debate where many people were just explicitly arguing that in some cases DSA should endorse left liberal or progressive candidates, or in some people outright arguing that the dirty break is either impossible or undesirable. Basically just trying to say that we should fully work with the Democratic Party. And I think that in hashing those out, I think people found our ideas more compelling. I think that, given everything that we've seen lately, the incompetence and the ineptitude of the Democratic Party in addressing any of our current crises, I think it has young people and students in YDSA very hungry for a more radical politics and for a future beyond the Democrats. And I will mention that one last thing, there were 3 amendments on this resolution that were up for debate, similar to our 14, which had 1 amendment. This one had 3, all were considered unfriendly. The first one was essentially a mandate saying that, YDSA chapters cannot endorse candidates independent of or separate from an endorsement from their main DSA. Which, some people criticized as 1, limiting YDSA's autonomy, and 2, not taking into consideration chapters that don't have an accompanying YDSA. And I believe, an accompanying DSA. And I believe that the author of that resolution ended up trying to add a carve out towards that purpose near the end, as in for chapters that don't have a main DSA. But either way, that debate or that resolution failed. The second one was essentially saying that DSA should prepare in advance as part of our electoral strategy, or YDSA should prepare in advance as part of our electoral strategy for Bernie's possible election campaign in 2024, Bernie Sanders, that is, and essentially saying that we should prepare and be ready to endorse him in the event he runs. We were, not adamantly opposed to that, but we found it somewhat unnecessary. And that amendment was actually withdrawn by its author and therefore didn't come to a vote. And then once again, the third one was very similar and from the same author as the resolution to R14. And this one, once again, deleted the actionable items from our resolution. Effectively, the main things that we were proposing were to have a pamphlet, have the quarterly meetings with YDSAers, and to bring this up to the NPC. By the way, very quick yes or no for anyone that can remember. Did the Third Amendment delete the part also about talking to the NPC, or did that leave that in place? It also deleted it?
I don't believe it deleted that part. I may be mistaken, but I believe it left that intact.
Understood. Then, yeah, the main 2 that we know that I remember for certain that it got rid of was the idea of developing a pamphlet or holding meetings on the dirty break strategy, both of which, we all believe are well within the capacity of National DSA, and all of which, had it passed, and well, it did pass, but all of which we are, willing as members of Reform and Revolution, as co-sponsors of the resolution, to put some work in and effort in towards its implementation. But that amendment was basically getting rid of much of the actionable items from R15, and we effectively made the argument that we should be having, once again, a political debate on the dirty break, and not just gutting or in any way weakening the original resolution. And so that resolution or that amendment was also voted down before we moved on to debate the actual resolution. So all three amendments that were considered unfriendly were either voted down or withdrawn, which then allowed for us to have a full, weighty discussion on the dirty break strategy, on our orientation towards the Democrats, you know, without necessarily having to have a bureaucratic or organizational debates. And I think that was very productive. And in the end, it led to, when the vote was finally called, the vote not being fully unanimous, but clearly enough in our favor that we didn't need to count. And the resolution passed overwhelmingly with the support of the delegates. And with that victory, both of R&R's resolutions and priorities had passed without any unfriendly amendments or anything to weaken them in their full form, in their full capacity. This it rocked. It was cool.
It was very cool. Yeah.
If I could clarify 2 points about that briefly. First, with regards to the voting. So what Alex is talking about, for those who don't know, is that at a convention like this, everybody gets their voting cards, right? And they're all in the room. And if there's a clear majority one way or the other, you don't count the precise vote. You're just like, oh, that side has it, that side doesn't. But if it's close enough, they have to count the specific numbers, right? So in this case, we can't say exactly how many people voted for R15, but it was a visible majority, you could say. On the other, perhaps more substantive point, again, I just want to speak to the concerns that were put forward. Specifically, the concern about capacity and necessity that motivated the third amendment. The proponents of this argued that there aren't enough YDSA members doing electoral actions for this amendment to make sense. And I think, just like the capacity argument, I think that argument makes sense. There's a reason to make it, and I understand where people were coming from. And I don't want to give the mistaken impression that this was just a purely malicious amendment, right? I think I think this was proposed out of a genuine difference of interpretation about how the dirty break will be manifested. And I would say that my response to that will be that, well, absolutely, certainly, there are very few YDSA chapters who play a critical role in campaigns themselves. The vast majority of YDSA chapters are confronted regularly with the question of orientation to the Democratic Party, whether that's a question organizationally, right? Do they politically rally with the Democratic Party? When does it make sense? When doesn't it? Do they support liberal groups that support the Democratic Party? When does it make sense? When doesn't it? Do they have visitors from the Democratic Party? How do they interact with progressive Democrats? So on. But also when they're talking to their members, right? Because this is the critical political question of our moment. We're governed by a failing Democratic administration, and the approval of Joe Biden has plummeted to something like, the low teens among many groups of young college students, right? So people are asking, what are the alternatives? What is the socialist response to these things? And I would argue that the dirty break allows us put forward a clear answer to those questions. And so, as I tried to articulate at the time, while this isn't intended to say that we can by ourselves create an alternative to the Democratic Party tomorrow, I do think that the question of the relation to the Democrats is one of the primary political contradictions of this moment, and that there is a significant amount to be gained through political clarity on that question, and that there is a significant amount that is lost by not having a clear political decision. And I think what is so significant about Resolution 15 passing is that it really is one of the most outlined, most clearly delineated forms of the dirty break proposal that has been passed in any section of DSA. Now, I'll be honest, I'm doubtful whether the NPC will institute these demands, but I'm hopeful that having demonstrated that a clear majority of members of YDSA seem to support these demands, and not just the demand in the medium to long term of breaking with the Democratic Party, but demands in the short term, like DSA candidates endorsing other socialist candidates, DSA candidates rallying to try to raise support for DSA, and so forth. I'm hopeful that the clarity of support that existed in YDSA can be manifested in other sections of DSA, whether that's local chapters or the upcoming national DSA convention next year. And I think if that can happen, right, if we can build on this moment, then it will become very clear that regardless of what individual leaders desire, the sentiment of the rank and file of DSA is for these concrete steps to be taken.
What are the next steps? What do you think would need to happen so that YDSA has a bigger impact on colleges, high schools, and beyond? What should DSA do to support this organizing work in YDSA? And yeah, what are the next steps for YDSA?
Well, from my own perspective, both as a chapter leader and as someone who's, this was my first convention, had my first real experience with engaging the national politics of YDSA head on. I think it's important that as socialists, but especially as students, we recognize that on campus, we need to engage a genuine theory of change that imagines a political project wholly outside what we're currently within. We need to be willing at every moment to engage students head on and to introduce them into a socialist politics that is confident and that truly believes that that revolutionary action is possible, necessary, and that it begins with the radical student sentiments that we're building on in our chapters. I think we saw that with the convention, and I think that's what we need to realize in our individual chapters to build the type of movement that's necessary to see a lot of what we passed through, especially with R14, I think. What we have is a program that's already radical and that encourages the genuine radical project that we have on campus to see itself through and to build the capacity that it needs to engage in reproductive rights and trans liberation campaign, to actually create these changes, right? Like a lot of people at convention said, we organize to build capacity and we build capacity to organize. This is a cyclical process that need each other. We cannot, while concerns about capacity were very legitimate and worth discussing, it's important to remember that as socialists, as organizers, and as students, it is always our responsibility at every moment to realize that we can come together, that it's necessary, and that by raising the consciousness locally, that's exactly how we engage a wider project, and that the wider project needs to be the goal that shows people it's worth being a part of.
Yeah, I can hop in a little bit on this. And yeah, I absolutely agree with that overall framing, but I can talk a little bit about like specifically implementing the two resolutions that we passed. So there was also at this convention at the end, there was our new national coordinating committee, the NCC, which is analogous to DSA's NPC, was elected. And there aren't any caucus members that were running or were elected to this committee just based on the limited capacity that we have. But I do think both before this convention and through the process of this convention and going forward, we've managed to make both an impact on the politics of like the rank and file of the organization and the politics and an impact on the perception of how much power we have as a caucus on the leadership. And we've also just made genuine connections with people. We worked with people on different things. We spoke in favor of people's resolutions. We had people, we whipped people to speak in favor of our resolutions. And through those connections, I think we can really leverage, a good implementation of this that will allow us to present our politics and have a significant role in actually carrying these things out and making sure that the campaigns that result from them are, in line with the actual proposals that we put forward and passed. And so there's going to be basically a national task force of sorts convened by YDSA that's already that's already been meeting in some form, but it's going to take a new shape under this new leadership. And I will be a part of that as representing R&R and as representing the lead sponsor of this proposal. And that's going to be a long process and very, very difficult, but basically it's going to be a matter of reaching out to different chapters, seeing where things are at, providing resources, and making sure that we can bring all of the chapters around the country on board with this, National Day of Action, and getting this proposal actually in place. And as for R15, I think the implementation of it is probably slightly easier, but it's still going to involve, a high degree of collaboration and ultimately exercising some amount of pressure and influence on the national leadership to get them to do what they need to do. But I do think that the implementation of those things, although, it can't be just the four of us that are doing everything, I think R&R will have a significant and powerful role in making those things happen and carrying those things out. So check.
The critical next step is the actual implementation. We've all learned in DSA by now that it is one thing to pass a resolution and quite another to put it into practice. So in terms of the logistical work that needs to be done, well, I think there's quite a lot that our caucus needs to do. As everyone has observed, we are a very small caucus. In fact, I suspect one of the smallest there by a pretty large margin. And so we need to talk with the people who were elected to the NCC. We need to talk with the people who disagreed with us. We need to talk with the people who are worried about capacity. And we need to try our best to address the concerns of those who did have concerns. If they feel they don't have the capacity, I'd like to talk to them and try to figure out whether they could build the capacity or whether there is capacity perhaps they don't recognize yet. And if they don't have the capacity, I like to discuss at a national level how we can help chapters build the capacity to participate in national days of action. We also need to meet with the leadership and not only find a plan to implement these resolutions that were passed, but find a strategy and find supporters who are willing to implement that plan. It is going to be an organization-wide effort. It's going to be a national effort, and it's going to take not just Reform and Revolution, but all of the caucuses, not just YDSA, but everyone in DSA, and it's only going to be the first step. So I think our goal is to approach this with as open a mind as we can bring and as clear political principles as we can offer, and with hope that the apparent mandate that been offered by this convention might present us an opportunity to implement policies I feel would be massive steps forward for this organization, but also the humility to recognize that we need the help of everyone in YDSA to do it. And even if we can get it done, it must be the first step. And so I would say, finally, I think we should always try our best to keep our end goal in sight and be thinking, what would the youth wing of a independent workers' party look like? And how can we try to develop that? And frankly, it looks quite different than what YDSA looks like right now. It would have to be more politically grounded, far more expansive, with a much larger participation. Hopefully these resolutions will be steps towards achieving that, but it's possible they won't. I am certainly open to engaging with the idea that I made a mistake somewhere. And I think as socialists, we all have to be. I think if done right, and if as successful as I hope they will be, these programs can help us build capacity, clarify our politics, and take steps towards political independence. But if they don't work, I don't think that ends the fundamental goal that we have to pursue, which is achieving independent political power from the Democratic Party, from the capitalist state, and eventually from the capitalist system itself. And I think so long as we hold those goals in mind as we take our actions within YDSA, while we will run into a lot of problems along the way, I think we do eventually have a very strong chance of success. I'll just close very briefly by saying I greatly appreciate all of my comrades in the caucus and everyone who came to the YDSA convention. It was a wonderful experience, my first in-person convention. I appreciate, as I said, everyone who spoke in the debates about the resolutions, everyone who helped write the resolutions. And I know, given the nature of these conventions, it can sound quite cynical when people say that they want to reach out to those who disagree, but I earnestly mean it when I say that I would like to talk to those who were concerned about these resolutions. And I believe that a strong resolution 14, a strong resolution 15 are good for YDSA. And I just want to do everything we can to implement it. And I'm happy to work with anyone who is interested in doing the same.
Well, I'm just joining R&R now, and I'm much less politically developed than everyone else in the Zoom call right now, that being a part of convention with R&R has been an extremely exciting experience. One that has really changed my perspectives on what the political horizons of YDSA are. And I'm extremely excited to see what grounding these politics and the actual organization and the political power of YDSA look like in the future. And I look forward to working with not only everyone in my chapter and in this caucus, but everyone nationally and trying to see our political programs through.
All right, awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, y'all, for coming and being a part of this interview. We're going to post this on reformandrevolution.org. If you're watching this video right now or listening to the recording and you like it, please share it. You can find many more reports and analysis of YDSA, DSA, and the wider socialist and labor movement on our website. If you want to support us, please go to reformandrevolution.org. You can subscribe to our magazine. It comes quarterly. It's wonderful. Yeah, thanks again to Jacob Alexander, to Alex, to Wallace, to Spencer. And we'll see y'all again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.